Welcome to the Crazy Chicken People podcast. If you're crazy about chickens, then you're in the right place. What's happening, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of the Crazy Chicken People podcast. Thank you very much for joining me again. I'm really excited about today's episode, even though it's one that I had to put together kind of last minute after having already done all the upfront work on what was going to be a totally different topic. And I almost never do this, mostly because I don't normally have the time to go through that process twice in a week. And this week was especially tough to go back and redo because I've been spending pretty much every minute of my free time putting together this giant haunted house for a big Halloween party this weekend, which sadly I will not be dressed as a chicken for, despite my efforts to make that happen. But that said, I did go back and change it all up because I got a message from a listener. Actually, it was a comment made in a review on Apple Podcasts, which I always appreciate getting. So I'll just share that review with you and then I'll get on with it. And I hope I don't butcher the name here. If I do, I apologize. A couple days ago, Ellery wrote me, "Hi, I love chickens and I am 10 years old. I love to go up to my room and listen to your podcast. I love it and you have every topic that I can think of. Do you think you can do an episode about chicks?" That totally got me. There's no way I couldn't just drop everything and do a show on chicks after getting that. I love caring for chicks anyways. I love talking about it. And I would be more than happy to do a show on them just for you, Ellery. And I want you to know how much I appreciate you listening and writing to tell me about it. In fact, with your parents' permission or with their help, it'd be great if you want to send me an email because I would love to send you some kind of cool little chicken-related thing. Not sure what that'll be exactly, but it'll be something cool. Promise. So I hope I hear from you, and thank you again for the positive review and the message. I really do appreciate it a lot. I wouldn't have guessed I'd ever get emotional over a simple podcast review, but that one really hit me in the feels. Maybe because I have some kids about your age too. So totally appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to run through my preferred methods for raising chicks, including brooder setup, feed, bedding, socialization, and how to move them to a larger space when that time comes. So jumping right into it, let's discuss providing the right habitat for your little chicks. I have used and have seen quite a few different items used to set up brooders. I know that using plastic storage totes is a really popular and common one. I've seen people raise them in bathtubs, small kennels, and of course, a variety of homemade brooders. And all of these can work out just as long as you're providing a safe, warm, and draft-free environment for them to live. That's really what's important. Personally, I've switched from using a combination of all of the above to building out some larger brooders in one of our barn stalls. And I'm actually going to do some upgrades on those soon. I had wrapped the outside walls and the upper enclosure pieces in 1/2-inch hardware cloth, and I'm going to switch that out to 1/4-inch. I've seen a couple of mice sneak through the 1/2-inch. I've even seen a tarantula in that brooder at one point with those little chicks. Was not happy about that. Wasn't happy to have to get that tarantula out of there or any other part of that. It was super not cool. It was kind of unbelievable to see that at first. The thing was just sitting on the wall a few inches above my chicks. And I was like, what is that doing in here? I don't even know how that thing got in. It's really hard to say, but it was in there. So switching from the 1/2-inch to the 1/4-inch hardware cloth on the roof and the side panels, and the floor in it is just plywood. I like having the built-in place, more permanent setup. It keeps me from having to deal with, repurposing other things and then storing them or trying to convince my wife that the storage tote I used as a brooder is still clean enough to store whatever kind of stuff she wants to keep around. But any of those other more mobile and temporary options work just as well as long as they are kept very safe and secure. Now, for keeping them warm in there, I prefer to use a brooder plate over a heat lamp. They're really nice for the young chicks because they can just crawl underneath them and get that warmth, similar to what it would be like if they were getting raised by a hen. Heat lamps work as well. I'm not as big of a fan because of the fire hazard. They could just kind of go out at any time. I've been worried about that before on a cold night. If that thing were to just burn out, those chicks are going to be in trouble. I guess the same thing could happen with a brooder plate. It could just go bad, but it won't burn out the way a light bulb could. For that first week of life, they need to be kept at 95 degrees. And then from there, you can start decreasing by about 5 degrees a week. And ideally, you'd like to provide them a space large enough that they can move in and out of the heat. There's going to be times where they want to be warmer, but having a space that they can move away from the heat and cool off a little bit if they need to is really nice for them. For the bedding, and I think I've brought this up before, again, for that first week, I have found that the very fine pine shavings seem to work pretty well. But after that, when I go to do that first cleaning, I'm pulling all those pine shavings out and switching to the bedding pellets. Those seem to be a bit much for them to navigate over when they are very, very small, but after a few days or a week, they seem to get around on them just fine. Definitely some other options out there, but those are the ones that I prefer. So now you've got a good, safe, warm place for your chicks to grow up, and it's time to start thinking about feed and nutrition. A good, balanced diet is so important for their growth. You want to start them on a high-quality chick starter feed that contains the right protein, vitamins, the minerals they're going to need. Just about any good brand of feed is going to have all those things. You just want to make sure you are using a starter feed for them, as their nutritional needs are going to be different than a grown laying hen. Now, you'll have to choose between using medicated and non-medicated feeds. If you're kind of back and forth on that, I would definitely recommend reading up on it a bit. I choose to go non-medicated, and that's worked for me so far, but both types of feed do have their place, so you just really need to pick what's important to you. But once you've got that feed in there, those little guys are really good at wasting it. I've noticed that in the past, usually that first cleaning, it's about half feed and half shavings. It was a lot of waste. I actually did a review on a chick feeder that I really like in a previous episode. I don't remember the name of it offhand, but I will definitely repost that link in the show notes for this episode. And when it comes to the water, I do believe it's very important that you keep fresh, clean water in there daily for them. It's very important that they always have access to that. You also want to try to place that in a spot where the water won't get real warm. Pretty quickly, they're going to kick little bits of shavings. They get some feed in there, a little bit of poop from time to time. All that stuff mixed with warm water, especially if it were to sit for a day or two, it gets pretty nasty. So definitely want to keep that water on the cooler side, away from the heat, just not so far that, they won't venture out to it, and just making sure they've got fresh water at all times. I think when I do redo these couple of brooders of mine, what I'd like to do is put a little shelf on the wall just above the brooder for a 5-gallon bucket, and then run some PVC piping down to the little spring-loaded water cups that I mentioned using before. I think it'll take a couple weeks for them to get, large enough to really use those, but once they're there, at least I know that they've got a supply of fresh water all the time. They're certainly a lot easier to clean than the little chick watering devices, so we'll see if I actually get to that. In the meantime, I'm using a standard little chick water thing that, probably everyone knows about. I will say, especially for smaller chicks like silkies, they're pretty small, and I started doing this when I was raising quail. Putting a few rocks or marbles in that water dish, just while they're really tiny, it can help make sure that nobody drowns in there. I've seen it before. They're leaning over trying to get a drink. They fall in, they're instantly soaked and can't move around as well, and they can die in there. So pretty easy to put something in there that'll help keep it shallow enough that if they do fall in on accident, they can get back out pretty quick. And then one last thing to keep in mind when you are setting up that brooder is the size of it and how long they're going to fit in there. There's a pretty good chance they're going to outgrow that brooder well before they're ready to move out into a coop. So you need to have a plan for that. Those little guys grow up a lot faster than you might anticipate. And, if you've got half a dozen chicks and they kind of just fit into that brooder that you have set up for them, within a couple of weeks, they're going to be much too large for it and they're going to need some more space. Of course, they're still too young to be moved outside. So have a plan for a larger brooder setup where you can still keep it warm, still keep them confined and safe, but just know they're going to outgrow that little one pretty quickly. So when you've got them set up, they've got access to food and water, they've got a good, warm, and safe brooder, You want to get into a habit of doing regular checks on them for any signs of an illness, anything that might be going wrong with them. Those little guys seem kind of fragile, so anything you can catch early and try to treat, it might be something as simple as getting some electrolytes into their water or cleaning up a poopy butt. Things can go wrong pretty quickly with a chick, so just make sure you're checking them a few times a day that everything in there looks good and nobody seems to have any health issues. And while you're doing that, make sure that their brooder is being kept clean. There's a lot of little birds in there. It can get messy pretty quick. And I know it's kind of a pain cleaning that thing so often, but just got to take extra good care of them while they are very young and fragile. And if they're always living in a clean brooder, it's going to be a lot easier from keeping those little balls of poop from getting stuck to their toes. If you've ever had to deal with that, it can be very difficult to remove those. They seem to form very quickly and they harden up like little rocks on their toes. It takes a lot of soaking, a lot of very gentle picking at it. It's not fun. It's not fun to have to remove that, especially for more than just a couple of birds. So if you can help reduce the chance of that happening, it'll save you some time in the long run for sure. And, while you're in there looking at their little toes, making sure they are clean, do keep an eye out for the poopy butt. I'm sure you guys have all seen it at some point. Also not fun to have to remove that. I actually spoke with a breeder friend of mine fairly recently and just asked her what she does for it. Knowing that she raises so many chicks, surely she's dealt with this hundreds of times and has come up with a good method, which what she suggested was better than what I was doing. I would get a cup of warm water and then hold that little chick in my hand. I would kind of do this little headlock thing where their head would be sticking out from a little hole that I make with my index finger and my thumb, and they can't quite push through there, so their little butt is on the other side, and dip my fingers in the water, rub that poop, try to break it off, doing that over and over while being very careful to not pull out any feathers or even, kind of pull their butt out of their body. I haven't had that happen, thankfully, but I have read stories about it. Anyways, what was suggested was, kind of hold that chick in that same little position and have a very tiny stream of warm running water that you can just let kind of run right over that poop, being careful to keep the rest of the chick dry. They do get cold easily, so you want to make sure when you're putting them back, they're still very dry. But just let that water kind of run over that thing, gently working at it, from time to time with your fingers, and it comes off pretty easily. And you should have a much better chance of not removing any feathers or anything else that you didn't mean to. And that process, which lately I've been doing pretty often. I know I said on a recent episode I was going to avoid any chicks, but right now I'm actually raising some for somebody else, which should actually be a cool story for down the road. But right now I am raising 9 little chicks. They're not for me, which kind of makes me feel a little extra pressure to keep them safe and make sure that, they all do grow up and eventually make it to their new home. And because I am raising these chicks for somebody else, I really want to make sure that they do get socialized and used to handling. I don't want to turn these birds over when they're older and mature and have somebody receive a flock that doesn't want anything to do with people. So really work to socialize your chicks early by spending time with them, gently handling them to build trust. I don't know that the headlock for the poop butt really builds much trust, but they always go back in, very safe and dry. I do keep a little soft cotton rag with me to dry their butt up a little bit. So hopefully they're not too traumatized by that. But the more time you spend with them, holding them, just making them feel comfortable with you, it's going to make future interactions much easier. It'll strengthen your bond with them. And it actually helps reduce their stress as they're growing up. They can feel that much safer every time you reach in there to change their water or to clean the brooder. And then, of course, eventually you'll have to start thinking about transitioning them to a coop. I've actually been surprised at just how many people in the last few weeks I've noticed asking in chicken groups about when to start moving birds from a brooder into a coop. And I say surprised not because it's like a dumb question or anything. I just didn't think a lot of people would be raising new chicks this time of year. But I guess, if you're trying to fill your flock out for next spring, maybe you're looking for a certain color layer or just want to add some additional layers so that, you are getting more eggs next spring, totally makes sense. But as far as when to make that move, I don't think there's a real straightforward answer for this. Generally speaking, around 6 to 8 weeks is the time you can start thinking about getting them outside into a coop, but there's a few things to consider. how cold is it going to be outside? In just a few weeks from now, it's going to start getting pretty cold, even here in Northern California. And a young bird may be feathered out at 6 weeks, but moving from a warm or, fairly warm brooder to outside on a harsh, cold winter night could be kind of a shocking transition. And I wouldn't recommend doing that. So as they're growing up, you should really start thinking about what time of year it's going to be as they do hit that age. Another important thing is, are they moving into a coop by themselves or are they moving in with an existing flock? A 6 or 8 or even 10-week-old pullet or cockerel is probably not ready to live in a coop and run with full-grown birds. There's a pretty good chance that they're going to get picked on. It's just something that happens. It's just a pecking order thing, and I don't think it's done maliciously, but the smaller birds are just going to be prone to getting beat up a little bit. So if you are moving them in with an existing mature flock, I would really recommend waiting until they are at least fully grown or very close to it. Just want to make sure that they're going to be large enough that they aren't getting physically dominated by the other birds. And I know people suggest, a few different methods for moving them in with a new flock. I've tried a couple of them. I prefer to move them in at night. The last few times I've added birds to a flock, I did do this method, just bringing them in the middle of the night, put them up on a roosting bar, usually hear a little bit of squabbling, some wings flapping, but it settles down pretty quick. Maybe socially it takes a little bit of time for them to get used to each other, but haven't seen any problems where, you're worried about somebody's health in there. I think either way, just monitor their interactions with the other chickens, make sure that they're integrating smoothly and that everybody's going to be safe. So, Ellery, there you go. Those are my best tips for raising healthy and happy baby chicks. These methods have worked well for me, but there's certainly not one right way to do this. Make sure you're keeping them safe, keeping them warm, plenty of food and fresh water, and before you know it, those chicks are going to be all grown up and ready to lay some eggs for you. Now that I've talked about chicks for a while, I totally want to go get some for myself. It's been hard to look at those chicks that I'm raising and know that they're going to be moving away before long. I have become kind of attached to them. They're super cute. They came from a great breeder. I'm going to be a little bit sad. So maybe I need to get my own. We'll see. If it happens in the next few days, I will fill you guys in on the next episode. Until then, you guys have a great week. Talk to you later.